Welcome to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I'm Drew's co-host, entertainment writer Jim Hill, and he and I are recording the show on Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. And I'm sorry, I guess we're getting into the bowl of candy early here because this is our Halloween, our special Halloween edition of the podcast. Right?
Yeah, I'm so excited. I want this to be an annual tradition now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But first, before we get to some spooky stories, we should probably start with the news that just broke. Well, today, didn't it?
Yeah.
Which I'm hoping will be considered a treat for fans of the Peabody Award-winning animated series Adventure Time. Okay, so refresh my memory. We had the series finale. What was it? Back on September 3rd of last year.
I cannot. Does it seem like it was that long ago? I swear, it feels like it just ended.
Not.
Yeah,
like 15 minutes ago. But
right.
No, according to my research, which of course is flawed, September 3rd, 2018. But I think we talked about at that time. This wasn't necessarily the end for Adventure Time, that there had been rumors that Pendleton Ward, who'd actually stepped away from the show in the 5th season.
Yes, who I grew up with, you know.
Yeah. I love your stories about your 5th grade notebook with his drawings on.
Yeah, they look exactly like Adventure Time characters. If I had those notebooks, I would be a rich man or something.
Oh, well, there we go. Yeah. But anyway, supposedly when he stepped away, and that was because, as you hear from showrunners on animated series, you basically have no life when you're working, on a show. So he stepped away, for a quality of life issue. But there was always this talk that he was working on potentially an Adventure Time movie. So that's not what we found out about today, is it?
No, yeah, and the last time I talked to him, he was saying that his movie idea was basically sort of a send-up of Disney animated movies, musicals to be exact, and he was writing songs and all this stuff, but that was a few years ago, so I have no idea what the status of that movie is, but no, what we're getting starting next year, I should say, on HBO Max, is a series of 4-hour-long specials, which I thought was sort of interesting, sort of in between an episode and a movie. Mm-hmm. Although the Rocko's Modern Life, quote-unquote, movie, I think was about that long. But, yeah I mean, are you excited about that?
I am. What I find intriguing, though, is think about it. We just had the news earlier this week about, the Studio Ghibli, HBO Max acquiring the streaming rights to their feature film library. And this is an interesting 1-2 punch, to get the Adventure Time. And again, I guess that they're called Distant Lands to sort of differentiate, I guess, from the series.
Right.
But, okay, so we're supposedly getting 2 next year. When the other 2 will drop, will be named later.
Right.
I honestly enjoy, always enjoyed Adventure Time. In fact, just the other day, I came across an old clip from the Ice King storyline, and what is the name of the vampire girl that he basically?
Oh, Marceline, the vampire queen.
Oh God, yeah, the story of Ice King in human form finding her basically in the rubble and sacrificing his sanity to protect this little girl. It's just, that's not the sort of story you expect in a children's television show. And it was really kind of heartbreaking and really deepened this basically comic villain character. So, yeah, I always enjoyed the stylization and the storytelling. So that, we've got 4 more hours of this world headed our way. I can't wait.
It was very interesting in that press release, too, that they actually trumpeted all the sort of animated shows that came out of Adventure Time, whether it was Steven Universe or Over the Garden Wall. Wasn't that interesting?
Oh, no, I agree. And in fact, didn't I just hear that, Steven Universe for this final season, they changed the title of the show?
Yeah, Steven Universe Future.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit that, Adventure Time was very fertile soil. Some great shows came out of that. wasn't it Rebecca Sugar
Yeah.
of Stephen who actually wrote that great song that basically ended Adventure Time?
Yeah,
Or?
she was a writer for a long time on Adventure Time, and she wrote that final song in the series finale that was, I cannot believe, 1 year ago. That is just blowing
Right.
my mind.
And speaking of writers, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I am so enjoying the Elton John official autobiography. Holt and Company published it just last week on October 15th. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up on an animation podcast is because Elton John, talking about The Lion King, again, you would expect him to be fairly pretentious, but it's really funny, straightforward to talk about the film. In fact, I pulled a couple of quotes out of the book here. It's like he starts off talking about the movie I don't want to sound mystical or even worse, smug, but it's sometimes hard to escape the feeling that life is patting me on the back for getting sober. 10 years after we'd last written a song together, Tim Rice phones me out of the blue and asked if would I be interested in working with him again. Apparently Disney was making their first animated film on an original story rather than existing work, and Tim wanted me involved. I was intrigued. The songs had to tell a story. The plan was we wouldn't write the usual Broadway-style Disney score, but try to come up with pop songs that kids would like. And I'm kind of, that kind of amuses me, Drew, because, the whole notion of, when they brought Howard Ashman and Alan Menken in, Disney, the songs had been so terrible for so long in the Disney films that, going back to doing the Broadway music style stuff was what they pointed to as to why Mermaid and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast broke through.
Right.
I
don't know what you're saying about the Oliver and Company songs, Jim, but,
Okay, moving on here. Anyway, he talks about working on an animated film. It was a strange process. Tim wrote the same way that Bernie Taupland did, which was lyrics first, and there was no getting around the fact that I was now writing a song about a warthog that farted a lot. Admittedly, I thought it was a pretty good song about a warthog who farted a lot. At the risk of sounding big-headed, I'm pretty sure in a list of the greatest songs ever written about a warthog who farted a lot, mine would be somewhat up where near the top. I mean, this is why I so enjoy this book. So, anyway, so they finished the film, and Elton John, gets to look at it after he comes back from touring, and he's like, I thought the finished film was extraordinary. I'm not the kind of artist who invites people over to play them my new album, but I loved The Lion King so much that I arranged for a couple of private screenings so my friends could see it. And he goes on to say, I was so proud of the whole thing. I knew we were onto something special, but I could never have predicted it'd be one of the highest grossing films of all time. Introduced my music to a whole new audience. You Feel the Love won an Oscar for Best Song. And that year, 3 of the 5 nominations in that category came from The Lion King, with one of the songs, Hakuna Matata, being the song about the farting warthog. So... what's great about this book is Elton John does get a little bitchy in it, and he talks about how the Lion King soundtrack sold 18 million copies, more than any album I'd ever released except my first greatest hits collection. As an added bonus, it kept Voodoo Lounge by the Rolling Stones out of the #1 spot on the music charts in America all throughout the summer of 1994. And he goes on to say, I tried not to be too delighted when I heard that Keith Richards was furious, grumbling about how their latest album was being beaten by some effing cartoon. So, anyway... He does constantly make fun of himself, so as part of this book. So he goes on to talk about when Disney announced it was turning The Lion King into a stage musical, for which Tim and I were asked to write more songs. I once again demonstrated my uncanny ability to predict exactly what is going not to happen. So I kept telling people that turning an animated film into a stage show was both impossible and doomed to failure. I couldn't see it at all. And, but then of course goes on to talk about the stage show directed by Julie Taymor, nominated for 11 Tonys, wins 6, and becomes the most successful production in the history of Broadway. So what does Elton John know? But here's the story. Again, as soon as I read this, it's like, I got to share this with Drew. I'd never heard this story before, and I want to know if, while you were at the company, you ever heard a whisper of this. So evidently this happens after The Lion King opens on Broadway. So that's November of 1997.
Okay.
All right. So he goes on to say, Disney is absolutely overjoyed with The Lion King success. So overjoyed that they come to me with a deal. It was for a ridiculous amount of money. They wanted me to develop more films, do TV shows and books. There was even talk about a theme park, which boggled the mind a little. There was just one problem. I'd agreed to make another film with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had been the chairman of Disney when The Lion King was made, but left a few months after the film was released to then go set up DreamWorks with Spielberg and Geffen. But Katzenberg hadn't just exited. His leaving Disney prompted one of the great Hollywood wars between executives, so epic that other people have written books about it. And the deal Disney was offering me was exclusive. It was particularly exclusive to anything involving Jeffrey, who was now suing Walt Disney Studios for breach of contract and $250 million, which he eventually got. And he goes on to say there wasn't anything in writing with Jeffrey, but I'd given him my word. Katzenberg was one of the people who brought him in to do Lion King in the first place. So I regretfully turned the Disney deal down, but at least the world was spared an Elton John theme park.
Interesting. I've never heard that before. I mean, when was Aida in all of this?
Well, Aida, I want to say, tried out.
Because that was originally an animated film, right?
Well, they
announced it as an animated film at some point.
They did. But Aida kept slipping back and forth. Initially, of course, on the heels of, as Pocahontas was in the works, the thoughts, well, let's look further down the line and maybe do another, story about a strong female. But then, Disney Theatrical got a hold of it. And I want to say elaborate, Nancy and I actually saw the tryout of Aida when it was done down in Atlanta. I mean, back then it was called Elaborate Lives, The Legend of Aida.
Elaborate Lives, The Legend
Elaborate Lives, yes. Trust me, Google it. It's
really rolls off the tongue, Jim, let me tell you.
Well, the other reason that particular production became famous because all of these other divisions at Disney worked on the show, and Walt Disney Imagineering had actually built the central prop set piece for the thing, which...
what?
It was this pyramid that could unfold itself into, for one scene it would be a boat, for another scene it would be a throne room, for a third scene it would be a set of stairs that the people could come down. The thing is that it never worked the way it was supposed to. More often than not, it would stop working in mid-show. That the cast actually had a pet name for it was Sybil, as in
the multiple personality.
There we go. So
wow.
Well, anyway, I as soon as I saw this, I made a call to a friend in Imagineering and said Elton John theme park, and he goes, no, he's got it wrong. He's remembering it wrong. We did approach Elton, and oddly enough, it was after the Rolling Stones turned down Disney's offer to use their music library, for Rock and Roller Coaster, that evidently Elton was the second one they reached out to, and with the notion of could we use your song catalog for Rock and Roller Coaster, and as we found out, he turned the deal down. So, you got to wonder, how far down in the pile was Aerosmith? Because again, that's the thing. Lion King opens on Broadway in 97. Rock and Roller Coaster opens at Hollywood Studios in 99. So, and in fact, Disney reveals that, there's a new roller coaster in the works for what was then known as MGM Studios in April of 98. So the timing works. But again, just because he had sort of this handshake deal with Katzenberg, it didn't fly. Though, getting back to Elton being a trifle bitchy, Did you see the GQ interview this week?
Where he talks about how he doesn't like the new Lion King.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, if you had done your homework, did you watch the new Lion King?
I can see it from here, Drew. It
Okay.
is literally, it's sitting in the pile. Again, if I weren't recording a Halloween podcast, I'd have it on tonight. But yeah, he flat out says he thinks that the film is a huge disappointment, largely because the soundtrack for the Lion King reboot fell off the charts so quickly. And what was it? He says something to the effect of, music was such a part of the original animated feature, and the music of the current film just doesn't have the same impact. The magic and joy were lost. And then, what? The Lion King at this point has made, 1.7 billion worldwide? Something like that?
Yeah. Also, he was included in the making of the Beyonce album. I think he co-wrote the song Spirit. That was the big hit off of that album. So I'm not sure what he's so bent out of shape about.
Yeah, because this is the thing. He literally says, that he feels like Favreau, said, I wish I'd been invited to the party more, but the creative vision of this film and its music was different this time around, and I wasn't really welcomed or treated with the same level of respect, which made me incredibly sad. So, he then goes on to say that I'm happy the right spirit for the music lives on in the Lion King stage musical, which is Elton's very subtle way of saying, go buy tickets. But anyway, speaking of Disney and cats, when Drew and I get back from this commercial break, we are going to talk about an animated feature that Walt Disney Animation Studios had back in development in 2004, 2005, that got canceled for all the wrong reasons.
Introducing Meta Ray-Ban Display, the world's most advanced AI glasses. With a full color display built into the lens of the glasses, it's there when you need it and gone when you don't. Send and receive messages, translate or caption live conversations, collaborate with Meta AI, and more. Be one of the first to try Meta Ray-Ban Display. Visit meta.com/Meta Ray-Ban Display to book a demo and find your pair.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
And we're back.
Oh, Jim, I wanted to say there's another book that we have to talk about at some point, which is The Queens of Animation, the untold story of the women who transformed the world of Disney and made cinematic history, by Natalia Holt, who is supposed to be great. Have you read it?
No, it's so funny you say this. I was down at my parents' house just yesterday, and my mother literally comes up to me with a clip out of the newspaper. She had read about that this is coming out. In fact, it was published this week, right, on Tuesday, the 22nd, from Little Brown. And it kind of startled me because if you think about it, we have the Mindy Johnson book about, the big coffee table book about the women of Disney animation, and there was that children's book.
That was sort of an adaptation. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and a Disney Plus series coming soon, Jim.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So have you gotten your hands on this thing?
No, I haven't. It's not quite cheap enough for me to pull the trigger on Amazon, so I am waiting. Maybe after we get our Patreon set up, I'll be able to indulge in these things. But the reviews have been out of this world, and apparently it goes all the way up until modern Disney. So I'm really excited to read it.
All right, let's get into it here. Okay, again, this is our Halloween show, and we did promise on our last podcast that we'd talk about the Black Cauldron and Fraidy Cat, but Drew, do we really need to talk about the Black Cauldron?
We got to do it, Jim. We got to do it. I heard you talked about on one of your other shows about the, the walkthrough in Tokyo with the cool Horned King animatronic.
I know, but it just... I just remember going to see this in theaters, and more to the point, I mean, face it, Disney acquires the rights to this thing in 71, and for 14 years, there is nothing but hype about it. I dug up an old interview from 1976 at Disney Studios. John Culhane, the film historian, is there interviewing the gentleman who at that time was seen as the future of Disney animation, the absolute rock star, Don Bluth.
Right.
Yeah, and, they said, all right, this is 1976, so you got Rescuers coming out the following summer, and then for the 1977 holiday season, you got Pete's Dragon. And, in fact, Don, directed all the animation for Pete's Dragon. So John says, okay, so what's exciting you guys? What's coming up next over the horizon? And Don says, right now, enthusiasm for a story called The Black Cauldron is boiling through the studio, and we hope that Disney's new generation of animators and artists can touch people with that story in a way that Walt never dreamed of. So, hey, relatively tiny ego here.
Set the bar real low on that one, yeah.
And the irony is that, Ron Clements, when he got asked about The Black Cauldron, because remember, Ron and John were one of the only people who were standing on the deck of the Titanic and were like, maybe this would be a good time to get into the Basil of Baker Street rowboat. They left the project. And, when Ron was asked, it said, well, look, that film was supposed to be our Snow White, but we just weren't ready for it. You can't talk about The Black Cauldron, really, without talking about when Don Bluth walked out the door in September of 79 and basically took a third of Disney's animation staff with him.
Right.
I mean, the studio had bought the rights to the Perdan Chronicles back in 71. And so, at this point, they've been working on and off on this film for 8 years.
Yeah.
And when Bluth walks out the door with literally the best of the next generation of animators, the film never recovers. I mean, Ron Miller turns around and gives Joe Hale sort of a battlefield promotion and makes him the producer of the movie, but Joe's never done anything like this before, and so he's trying to look through all of this concept art and this test animation and try to figure things out. And at this point, the film doesn't really even have a villain.
Right.
And so Joe makes the call that, well, let's make the Horn King, who's a minor character who's actually, as I understand it, killed in like the first or second book.
Well, that was the thing. Did people, was this book series popular? I mean, was it like Lord of the Ringsy back then? Because you never really hear about it talked about since Black Cauldron.
Well, the irony is that it wasn't 2 and 3 years ago. Evidently, Disney was circling back, supposedly, on doing the Perdan Chronicles as live action.
Yeah, I mean they have the rights back, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, face it, in our Disney Plus subscription streaming world, especially on the heels of look what just happened with the Dark Crystal reboot.
Right.
It's sort of like, ooh, maybe this would be the way to actually finally tell that story. But poor Joe, he looks at the Horn King and it's like, well, why is the Horn King the villain? And it's like, well, he's, he said, we thought the Horn King would make a good animation character because he has horns sticking out of his head.
Wow.
It's like, and this is the thing, if you're reading the annual reports from 1980 going forward, again, they keep promising what they can't ever deliver. I mean, it's described there as a classic fairy tale combining the most exciting elements of Snow White and Fantasia in a film. It's a film that will one day take its place beside the great animated features. And it's just sort of like, oh, guys, rein it in, be realistic, And then they make the decision to go 70 millimeter, which, now it's you have to work with larger sheets of animation paper. You've got to fill, more screen. And then the late in the game Hail Mary, Drew, I swear to God, Floyd Norman actually got to see the test of this, and he was talking about. Have you ever heard about the hologram that they wanted to do?
Well, I was going to say that, researching this, you look through, and every year there's another description of what this black cauldron is supposed to be, throughout the 70s and early 80s, and it's just so funny. But yeah, talk about what that hologram was supposed to be.
That, again, in a weird sort of doubling back on what we were just talking about with Elaborate Lives, the Aida musical. So Walt Disney Imagineering had been working on holograms, but with the notion of using them for Epcot. And
for what?
That was the thing. It was supposed to be initially featured in the Horizons Pavilion. I mean, the notion of, in fact, I want to say in the cityscape scene at the end, there was also talk about, can we use it as an effect in energy? I mean, again, they had all of these effects that they wanted. That was how they're going to make Epcot stand out. I mean, so that's where Smell-O-Zizer came in, and, the initial use of IMAX screens and that sort of thing. So
God bless it. God bless it, Jim. Early Epcot. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
No, that's it exactly. So what ends up happening is that somebody from Imagineering comes over, sees this test holograph thing, and goes back blithering about, oh my God, you've got to come see this. And again, face it, the whole time they were working on the Black Cauldron, the whole notion is that the story point is the reason that the Black Cauldron is sort of the ultimate weapon is that, you can bring back the dead. You can have this, form this giant army of the undead warriors. And, but the notion is, well, how do we portray that in the movie? How do we make that something that totally startles an audience? And the notion is, well, what if, suddenly the movie goes 3D, throw a hologram in, and the cauldron, we literally watch an undead warrior step out of the cauldron over the audience. And they dummy up the footage. They set up all of the equipment in it's on the Disney lot, there's that big theater.
Are you doing the Mary Poppins stage or the?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, and that's the thing, for a couple of days they had it set up, and people could go in and they would literally go, they'd run the footage from, the Black Cauldron that they'd animated to that point of the Horn King starting the spell, conjuring the Cauldron born, and then, literally they'd turn off the projector, turn on the hologram producer, and there suddenly is a 3D cauldron. This undead skeletal warrior steps out and is looming over the audience. And everyone who saw the footage, Floyd included, lost their minds. It's like, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing they'd ever seen. And are we really going to be able to do that? And it's like, well, yeah, if the theater owners agreed to buy this piece of equipment. And suddenly it's Phantom Sound all over again, Drew. It's 1940, and people have to pay all of this dough to do this. And they, as I understand it, they went out and had conversations with exhibitors. And remember that the Black Cauldron debuted at Radio City Music Hall, in the summer of '85, and that was the thing they were really hoping, like, wow, if we could debut this technology there, and imagine the size of that screen and the size of that theater, doing, a cauldron born looming over that audience. Mm-hmm. But it never happened. Radio City at that point was trying to figure out how to keep the lights on.
Right.
They were spinning around the bowl themselves at that point. So, again, for me, the fact that the film, again, the villain is the guy with the horns on his head. They spent 14 years. They couldn't figure out what the story was. I mean, it's just, for me, it makes me crazy when movies that clearly shouldn't get greenlit go into production. But conversely, things that just look like a surefire hit, a solid film, don't get made. And which now brings us to Fraidy Cat.
Well, before we get to Fraidy Cat, should we talk about Katzenberg's reaction to?
Yeah.
So he sees it, right? He's like coming through the door, and he doesn't know how animated movies are made. And so he kind of asks to like redo some scenes where they say, Jeffrey, this is animated. But ultimately he cuts, 6 minutes of stuff?
Well, Depending on who you talk to, that I've heard as low as 6 and as high as 12.
Really?
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting is if you remember, that this film is in production during a time when Disney had created a separate unit at the company that would sell animation cells.
Yes.
In fact, I remember when I was managing the Acton Twin Cinema in Massachusetts, in the same plaza where my theater was, there was an art gallery that had the area exclusive on Disney cells. And, I would go over and, just, do I really want to spend $100? And again, $100.
Right.
On, from the Rescuers or get something from Pete's Dragon and that sort of thing. And the interesting thing is that there are cells that got out in the retail channels during this period from those cut scenes. And so you have these incredibly grotesque cauldron-born warriors with skeletal figures with their skin sliding off or, them attacking and killing human warriors. I mean, the images are out there. But Katzenberg, as you mentioned, just cut them out of the movie. I don't know. Again, we live in this Disney Plus age, and it's like, that stuff's got to be in the vault.
Let us in there. Let us in there. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to Fraidy Cat.
Yeah. I think both you and I have a love for this particular project. It's really the Disney feature that if you're a film fan, especially a fan of the work of Alfred Hitchcock, that would have been this wonderful Venn diagram of a movie where it not only made affectionately spoofed classic Hitchcock movies like North by Northwest and Suspicion and Rear Window and that sort of thing, but it also was supposed to have been the very first completely CG film that John Musker and Ron Clements made for Disney Studios. And
I didn't realize it was supposed to be CG. Maybe since I've only seen, the artwork, that I just assumed that it was going to be 2D. But I didn't know that it was going to be 3D.
Yeah, well, in fact, what's interesting for me is that I remember being at SIGGRAPH in 2004. And this was right after David Staten had shut down Walt Disney Animation Studios Florida. And 258 artists and animators let go, largely because this is when Michael Eisner and Steve Jobs are not getting along. In fact, Disney shuts down Florida studio January 12th. And January 30th of 2004, that's when Jobs announces that, he's breaking off negotiations with Disney and that when they deliver Cars in June of 2006, Pixar is officially a free agent, and it's going to go basically, going to get into business with somebody else and emerge as Disney's direct competition. And Eisner immediately pivots to David Staten. What's interesting is that he came in to run Disney Animation Studios in January of 2003, and this was right after November of 2002. That's when Treasure Planet came out.
Right.
And that's the thing. I'm one of those handful of people who love Treasure Planet. I think Ron and John did a fine job with this film, but for some reason it just did not connect with audiences that year. And studio spent $140 million to make the thing, and during its entire domestic run, it only makes $35 million. $35. That's right.
$35. Yeah.
They found that money in the couch cushions. And so Staten comes through the door. He's been over at Disney Television Animation, and he comes in as the new president of Walt Disney Feature Animation. And Eisner basically pulls him aside, and it's like, look, we've had a series of films. In fact, the only one in that pile in that time that really made money was Lilo and Stitch, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because in the Iger book, he really downplays the success of that movie, which I thought was really interesting. He calls it a modest hit. He doesn't really engage with how much the character has kind of infiltrated the parks and everything. I thought that was really interesting.
And correct me if I'm wrong. You've been hearing the same thing about that's what one of the next things to be rebooted, right? You know, with the
the
CG Stitch. You know, working with a real live girl from Hawaii.
Right.
Well, anyway, okay. So Staten comes through the door January 2003, and he's got his marching orders from Eisner. It's like lower headcount, lower cost. You need to right the ship at Disney Feature Animation, and we need potentially to be ready to go into battle against Pixar. And meanwhile, Ron and John, Treasure Planet was a grueling project and ended badly because, well, not just the box office thing, but you know the stories about what happened after 9/11 and how both Lilo and Stitch and Treasure Planet had to make, you know, some pretty drastic changes. Again, supposedly it was Eisner's suggestion that there couldn't be any guns or knives in a Treasure Planet, which makes for an interesting bunch of pirates.
Right.
And then, what was it? Lilo and Stitch had to take out that entire plane flying through Honolulu scene.
Which did finally make it onto one of the Blu-rays.
Yeah,
which is fascinating. But
oh, no, I agree. But yeah, so here's Musker and Clements, and they're feeling kind of bruised from the whole Treasure Planet experience. And they start talking about, you know, I'd like to have fun making a movie again. And they think back to their very first project, The Great Mouse Detective. And again, you know, they had, you know, the smarts to get out of working on Black Cauldron while the getting was good. And you know, they're two film buffs. They're two guys who grew up watching all of the black and white Universal Sherlock Holmes movies that Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce made. And in fact, that's the weird part. They made 12 of those things in the 40s.
Right.
And so, you know, they were thinking about that film was their tribute to, or Basil Baker Street was their tribute to the Universal Sherlock Holmes movies. And that got them talking about other movies that they loved. And some of the films they love are Alfred Hitchcock stuff. And out of that kind of grew the conceit for Fraidy Cat, which was, wouldn't it be interesting if instead of, say, Cary Grant, you know, as the guy who's caught, accidentally gets sucked into a conspiracy or murder mystery, that sort of thing, or Jimmy Stewart or the like, what if it were a house cat?
Right.
You know, and it's sort of like, okay. So they start to assemble, cherry pick some folks that they've worked with in the past. They get Andreas Deja comes on board to help animate the thing, and which, by the way, ties in with your thoughts on the project, Drew, that it must have at least started out as a hand-drawn project.
Yeah.
Because Andreas doesn't, you know, I mean, again, Andreas has described CG as it's puppetry, it's not animation.
Right. Well, that artwork was at the SIGGRAPH you went to, right? With
it had
Fraidy Cat, American Dog, and something.
It did.
Else, right?
Meet the Robinsons and Rapunzel's Unbraided.
Yes.
And Hans Bacher comes on as a production designer, likewise Harold Sperriman. And they get together, you know, relatively clever script. Again, a movie that's designed for film fans. There are all these clever nods to North by Northwest and Rear Window and Vertigo. And in the end, Ron and John felt like they'd really hit, you know, that they got the Venn diagram working. They got a movie that would appeal to kids and families, but at the same time, there were enough smart film jokes that, you know, the Hitchcock fans would get it. And the interesting thing is, just down the hall from them, Chris Sanders is working on his follow-up to Lilo and Stitch, and which is, as you just mentioned, American Dog. You know, a kind of a road picture type film, but you know, right from the get-go, Chris sees the handwriting on the wall, and he's definitely making this one as a CG film.
Right.
Well, anyway, so we talked about the shutdown of the Florida Animation Studio.
Which is where Chris worked, we should say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, and like I said, you know, again, you know, there was, you know, the artwork on display at SIGGRAPH, and with Disney for Disney, very aggressive at the 2004 SIGGRAPH, recruiting artists and animators who were familiar with CG to come work at Disney because, going forward, this was what they were going to make. And Ron and John at this point kind of realized, like, oh, he really wants this, or David Staten really wants this to be a CG film. And they're like, well, okay. I mean, we've always had CG in our movies. We've clocked, the Big Ben scene, Gearworks and Great Mouse Detective. What is it? In The Little Mermaid, it was the ships that Ursula pulled up from the bottom in that staircase scene. Mm-hmm. Likewise, the first ever Caps colored scene is in Little Mermaid. And
yeah.
then, what is it? Aladdin, you've got the Cave of Wonders, who disturbs my slumber? And, the chaos scene and the Hydra and Hercules. And then by the time you get to Treasure Planet, you got the boats, you got Ben, you've got Long John Silver's leg and arm. So, they're familiar now. So it's not necessarily a hardship to have to do this movie in CG. And in fact, the way they sort of rationalized it was, well, look, if we're going to do Hitchcock-like camera tricks, computer animation is the way to go. So
yeah, I mean, they had used the deep canvas, right, all through Treasure Planet. So I'm assuming that would have really carried over into this movie, because they really did want to make it a thriller as much as a comedy, which I think is really interesting.
That's it exactly, and more to the point, they wanted it set in a sort of a fog-bound London, so the notion is, we can do some really interesting stuff here. So, all right, it's 2005. Ron and John get Fraidy Cat up on reels. They begin holding work-in-progress screenings of the studio, and they get really positive reaction from not only folks at the studio, but people, elsewhere around the company. And here's the final logline version of the story. So Oscar is a lazy house cat whose comfortable life turns around when an injured parrot named Rebecca flies into his apartment. Oscar tries to help her, but when his owner Doris enters the room, it looks like Oscar ate the bird. Although innocent, all of the evidence leads to Oscar. In order to get his comfortable life back, Oscar has to prove his innocence and go after Rebecca, who had just flown out the window. And what I like about this description, of course, is that Rebecca, the parrot character, is a nod to Alfred Hitchcock's 1940 hit, Rebecca.
Right.
So,
which is being remade by Netflix right now.
Is it really?
Yeah. It really, Armie Hammer's in it, yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay,
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, the one person who doesn't seem to be reacting well to this now is David Staten, who, as he's watching this movie, is now getting worried that, what if this is too inside baseball? What if this is the sort of movie that will only play to film fans? And the story that I got told is, how they do those sort of post-screening note sessions and I guess Staten at one point turns to everybody in the hall here and goes, will anyone today even remember who Alfred Hitchcock is? Our kids in 2009, and by the way, that's when Fraidy Cat was slotted to go out into theaters, the holiday 2009. Are kids today going to pay good money to see an animated film that pays tribute to an old, fat, dead movie director?
Ugh.
Yeah. So the other thing that I find fascinating is that there was a friend of the studio who was telling me that one of the other things that was kind of pushing Staten to make this decision is evidently he'd gotten research that basically said that, look, audiences given a choice prefer to go to animated films about dogs, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatian, Fox and the Hound, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Whereas if it's a cat story, like, say, Gay Paris or Cats Don't Dance, that just the box office of those movies, proves itself,
I love that someone brought up Gay Paris in any context, let alone Talk about it being an out-of-date reference. Oh,
well,
my
and
God.
never mind that. Just the whole notion of that Disney had made the Aristocats in relatively, 1987, had made Oliver and Company. So, but again, that's the thing, that's the beauty of cherry picking research to, when you're looking to get a certain conclusion.
Right.
Anyways, so Staten in 2005, August of 2005, shuts down Fraidy Cat. And the very next month, Musker and Clements resigned from Walt Disney Animation Studios, figuring that, look, current management team doesn't have their back, doesn't seem to respect them as filmmakers anymore, so let's go find someplace else to work. And Drew, you'll appreciate this because I had this conversation with Don Hahn at our office in Toluca Lake.
Good. The Bob's Big Boy?
Bob's Big Boy. So I met, Nancy and I met Don there one morning for lunch, and we got talking about Fraidy Cat, and he literally talked about, he was still at Disney at that time, and as Ron and John are going out the door, he's talking about, look, I'm going to put all this material on a low shelf, which means it'll be ready when you guys come back to Disney. This film will be here. And, as soon as you walk back through the door, this is a good movie and we can get right back to work on this thing. Ron and John aren't out the door at Disney for a day or so when they get a call from John Lasseter. And it's like, hey, can you come up to Emeryville? And they're like, oh, cool, we're going to get to direct movies at Pixar. And that's not what happened at all. They go up to the campus there, and they end up in a conference room with, Ed Catmull's there, Pete Docter, all of these creatives and management types at Pixar, and they proceed to spend the afternoon grilling Ron and John about what's going on at Disney Animation. Tell us about the management team. Tell us about who's working there now. And the meeting ends without a job offer. And Lasseter is walking Ron and John out to the parking lot and basically stops him and says, look, I know Katzenberg is going to offer you a job at DreamWorks. Don't take it. Just all I ask is don't do anything. Don't sign it with anybody for a couple of months. And, and so they fly home and like, what the hell was that all about? And of course, what that was all about is, in fact, it's in Iger's book, Ride of a Lifetime. They were already, the backdoor negotiations for Disney to acquire Pixar for $7.4 billion was in the works. And remember that part of this arrangement was that Lasseter was going to take over as a the lead creative at both Disney and Pixar. And so he wanted to know going into the situation, what he was dealing with. And anyway, so that deal gets announced January 25th, 2006. And supposedly Lasseter's very first phone call after this news gets broken is to Ron and John and says, come home, all is forgiven. And so Ron and John are like, cool, all right, we're going to get to make Fraidy Cat now. And it's like, nope, that's not what happens. John had, as part of, the interviews, related to the Disney acquisition of Pixar, had been asked about, are you, because again, Disney had supposedly stopped making traditionally animated films, and that's actually what's kind of interesting is it was when Lasseter came through the door at Disney that traditionally animated films stopped being called traditionally animated films. They then became hand-drawn animated films, to sort of...
Cool.
Well, just the whole notion of that traditional versus computer somehow made computer seem lesser, whereas hand-drawn and computer, it's like, okay, they're equal in status.
Right.
But John, had promised that he would bring back hand-drawn. And who better to take charge of that project than, Ron Clements and John Musker, the guys who had basically reinvented the Disney princess film. And since John wanted to sort of stick his flag in the ground and be the, have the first traditionally animated film under his watch be the first Disney film to feature, an African-American heroine, Fraidy cuts.
By the way, we got a request on social media to do a deep dive into what happened with Princess and the Frog, so we have to do that.
Okay, okay,
especially because there's this new podcast about Song of the South. Have you heard about this?
No, what's going on?
Do you know the You Must Remember This podcast?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
Karina Longworth.
Karina Longworth. Yep. Yeah. So her next 6 episodes, Jim, are all about Song of the South.
Really?
Yep.
Ooh, okay.
How uncomfortable does that make Ryan Johnson, who's supposed to make 3 more movies for Disney, feel? Who she is married to, I should say. Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, she's married to Ryan. Yeah. So anyway.
Okay.
The first episode is out. It's fascinating. She only gets one bit of Disney history wrong that I called her out on Twitter. But yeah, it's a really interesting show. So yeah, you gotta check it out.
No, I love her stuff. I've been listening to her for years. In fact, last year she did that amazing series of shows about Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. Or was it Patton Oswalt was the voice of Boris Karloff? I want to say.
Yes, I believe so.
Oh no, those are great. No, that's must listening, folks. Go. So check
anyway, there'll be a couple more episodes by the next time we record. So we'll talk about more of it then. But we should talk about Princess and the Frog. Is all I'm saying. But
well, anyway, no. I because that's the thing. I was there in March of 2007 when Lasseter stood on stage and announced the Frog Princess and announced that, here's our lead character, Maddie, who's the maid in, one of the fine homes of New Orleans. And from the very first day that project got announced, there was pushback.
Right.
And that's why Tiana became a restaurateur, or somebody with a dream of opening her own restaurant, because the push, I remember the whole Maddie is a slave name thing.
Yeah. Now she's got her restaurant on the cruise ships and other things. And, yeah.
But yeah, all right. So
we'll circle back. But
no, definitely. But but the thing is that here's Ron and John, who John Lasseter brought us back to Disney, and sure, we'll take a hit for the team. And all right, they end up producing Princess of the Frog, which comes out in November of 2009. What do you know about Mort?
I know it is one of the novels in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett, and that I think is what caused its cancellation, right? Is that they couldn't really untangle it from the rights of the sort of bigger rights of the Discworld novels, correct?
Well, that was the thing. As I understand it, Ron and John had settled in on Mort, wanted to do this as their next film with Disney. But the thing is, they started before they had the rights. And when Disney went to Terry Pratchett, again, my research here, there are 42 books in the Discworld series. Is that real?
I'm trying to see how many. Yeah, 41. Yeah, is that what you said? 41? Yeah, 41. Yeah.
And and that was the thing. Disney was like, it's like, I just want to make a sandwich. It's like, well, you got to buy the whole supermarket. And that's how they ended up, that they put a full year of effort in. And that in fact, what's interesting is we're a couple of years out now, almost 9 years out. And what's interesting to me is that every so often you'll see Mort concept art bubble up.
And it's amazing looking.
It is. But, finally what ends up happening, that project can't go forward because they can't get the rights. So they pivot to Moana, which, again, the fact that it, from 2010 to 2016, it takes a while to get Moana out the door. And all those years when Maui was the lead character and...
Yeah, I think that he would. Yeah, it was called something. It was called like Big Maui or something initially. Yeah.
That a lot of people have pointed to the fact that when you look at, it's directed by Ron and John, but then the very next title is co-directed by Don Hall and Chris Williams. This is Musker and Clements, who previously didn't need any help to get a film out the door, and it's. It kind of breaks my heart that, 18 months after Moana's release, John Musker retires. It's just sort of like, this isn't necessarily as much fun as it used to be. And, Ron Clements is still in the building, still doing great work. And more to the point, all of the art and the storyboards for Fraidy Cat were sent over to the ARL. And they're in storage there now, Drew. And wouldn't you think, Fraidy Cat would be the perfect project for Disney Plus? I mean, they could go the live action Lady and the Tramp route. They could shoot this thing with real cats and real parrots.
What about a limited series? Wouldn't that be, each one has a cliffhanger? I think that would be great. I think that would be awesome.
Okay.
And I think it would be great if it was traditionally animated. Sorry, hand-drawn animated. Just think about that.
You see, you blew what I was setting up there. I was trying to get Nova work. All right,
she can be a model for one of the characters.
Okay,
I think.
All right. Because again, you and Katie could fly over to London. They'd have to shoot on location there, and
Oh wow! Now you're talking, Jim.
Okay,
now you're talking.
So,
I think she's cute enough to be in a movie, but
I agree. It's a beautiful dog who, and again. She flies with you tomorrow, right?
Yes. She will be my emotional support animal on the plane, or maybe Katie's emotional support animal on the plane. We'll see where we're sitting on the plane, but yes,
it's ironically enough that's how Nancy describes me these days. It's her emotional support animal. Okay. Anyway, so, while we're on the plane, are we going to be doing our due diligence and looking at even more Mission Impossible stuff, or what are we?
Yeah, we actually got a really big, we got a confirmation for a really big guest who I can't talk about yet. I think that Dan Z will be very excited. I can say it's a female guest.
Ooh.
She has ties to J.J. Abrams and one of the Mission Impossibles. And we are very excited to have her on the show. So, that's going to be really good. But right now we still have our, I think we just finished up our interview with Tom Cruise's stunt double, who was really great. And we're just starting we're starting the Scott Chambliss interview, who is a great production designer, who I'm sure, from the Star Trek movies. And he did Tomorrowland with Brad. And he got to build stuff at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, which is amazing. And he did the production design for Mission Impossible 3. So he's our first production designer we've had on the show. It's really exciting. He tells some amazing stories. So you're really going to want to tune into that. It's really, really good. So that's starting up, I think, the week that this episode airs. So and check it out.
This is Drew talking about his Light the Fuse podcast.
The Fuse. Yes, you have to listen to it.
So definitely go check that out, folks.
Yes.
Over here, we've also got Disney Dish with Lentesta. We just did today. You're going to love this, Drew. We did a podcast about the never-built Africa Pavilion for Epcot. And Len actually went into the Buddy Baker archive at NYU and got the music that he wrote for the attraction.
I was curious. Did you get that cleared, or what?
Disney Music is licensing the ability to share this music. So
how much is that costing? That's what
I believe there's at least a kidney involved.
Okay.
I don't ask the questions. I just research the pointless stories.
Well, I just listened to that interview with those two people who live at Disney World, and I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
I get exhausted when I have to leave my house for 2 and 3 days. The notion of 365 days of living out of a suitcase and, doing my laundry in the hotel laundry room and constant eating at restaurants. It's just sort of like, no.
Well, I mean, I was there for 3 days last week and it felt like 800. So I cannot even imagine what that feels like psychologically. Yeah.
Nuts.
Anyway.
Nuts. Okay. But we also, what do we have? The Looking at Lucasfilm with, Dan Z. We have our marvelous Disney podcast that I do with Aaron Adams, the gentleman who edits a lot of the podcasts here. We have Universal Joint with Dustin Fuse, and we have I Want That with Michelle Vido-Lead, who at this moment should be getting off a boat, headed back to a Disney theme park. So, all right. Anyway, folks, tell you what, if you could do Drew and I a favor here, if you could head over to iTunes and rate and recommend Light the Fuse as well as Fine Tuning, that would be very helpful. And if you really, really, really like what you hear here, if you could head over to Bandcamp and subscribe, that keeps us in dog treats. So
Thank you for joining us on this spooky episode.
Yes, ooh, just safe travels to Drew, and hopefully we'll be back. Once he gets back from his travels, we'll be back with a brand new episode of Fine Tuning. Till then, take care.